You feel obligated to do something, show up for something, say things, and are you expecting and making other people feel obligated? Ooh, that's what we're going to talk about today, the sense of obligation. Check it out. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and I am back from vacation. And last week I told you, I hope I had a good time because I recorded it prior. I had such a good time. It was seriously one of my most favorite vacations. And I think it's because I really unplugged. We did Busch Gardens. We did the ghost tour, which of course you guys know that's the other side of me. So I got all of this cool stuff and then I was telling them about it. So the people who were leading it, I suddenly started talking to them about it. So it was really cool. We did a ridiculous amount of drinking, ridiculous amount of eating, and 3 nights of bowling. We forgot how much we love bowling, and I'm kind of good at it. Like I didn't realize how good I was. And I mean, let me pump my brakes. Not like I'm going to win a league, just out. And sometimes you have good games and sometimes you don't. But it was so much fun. Here we are. It's been basically a week since I've been back. It's crazy. Happy to be back here. It was really funny before I jump into this. My mindset is, your mindset always has to be the forefront because you have a choice, right, on how you see things. I got there Saturday. Monday, probably because I was drinking too much on Sunday night. One of my contacts literally like ripped in half, like part of it was on the sink. And I was like, oh man, I had my glasses with me, fairly new glasses, like a couple weeks old. And so it was just made it a little difficult for me. And then Thursday, I was chewing like some older, like Swedish fish, boom, yanked out my crown. So we just started laughing about it because if you can't laugh about yourself and the situations, then you're going to be very sad and very upset. And that is a good kind of segue into what we're talking about today, which is really obligation, right? Because you do so much of your suffering, you create so much of your suffering by feeling the need to meet other people's obligations and inflicting obligations onto somebody else. I have a stellar worksheet over on Patreon that is going to complement this podcast. However, it is going to force you to dig deep, both on why you feel obligated, but also why you're projecting those obligations onto other people. Highly recommend it. If that is your jam and you want a good starting point, then hop over to Patreon, patreon.com/the Positivity Experience, or you can find that link in this show description, which is the description, anywhere that you are. So I really want to talk to you about it because this obligation thing is probably something that I see within my clients a lot. And honestly, I mean, I went through it too, right? So remember, I'm somewhat farther removed from it, but I'm not that far removed from it that I forgot. And it can be very debilitating, right? Because you're sitting there and you feel this sense of obligation to meet these needs and to do these things. This is also where people pleasing can come into play pretty heavily. Feeling obligated and people pleasing go really well together. It's like a marriage. No, it's not. Just because you feel obligated doesn't mean you're walking around people pleasing. But I got to tell you, good percentage is yes. Okay, good percentage is yes. So let's talk about where in understanding kind of the sense of obligation, where that comes from, why it happens, and then also, are you doing this to other people? So before I get into any of that, think about the cycle, right? There's a cycle. When we are born, we are already starting to get programmed, right? When you're born, you're given a name. Actually, you haven't chosen your name. I've talked about that before. You're given a political, a religious affiliation, how we do things in the family, what I want from you, what our morals are. By the way, you haven't you haven't chosen any of that. You haven't chosen any of that. These are programs. All through your life, you're being programmed. The beautiful thing about being programmed is what? Is that you can rewrite those programs, right? See, that's the gorgeous part. But first, you got to understand that these are programs. And sometimes you can be like, man, my whole life was kind of a lie. No, it wasn't a lie. You were just programmed a certain way. But it's up to you to do the deprogramming. And then again, outside of the obligation, then, I talk about it in a lot of the podcasts is you can't wait for somebody else to deprogram you. You can't wait for someone's, I'm sorry, and I shouldn't have. That's not going to help your deprogramming. It's not, because it's never going to be enough for you. You're never going to be satisfied with it. So the deprogramming is going to come within, and that is always based in the obligation. So where does that come from in the first place? It's societal conditioning, right? So first of all, you got the societal conditioning where there's a level of expectations, acceptable behaviors, a sense of duty to follow the rules. Now, of course, we can't just walk out and say, I need money and go hit up a bank. Yep, you're right. There's going to be consequences there. Yeah, those are rules that you're going to have to follow. If not, then the whole world would just be running amok. We'd have no rules, everything. Oh, it would just be a nightmare. So there are certain things that you have to carry consequences, right? You steal money out of your parents' purse, there's going to be a consequence. That's not so much what I'm talking about. This societal norm of expectations. So of course we say please, we say thank you, all of those things. That's kind of an expectation, but we kind of use that as like, okay, well, this is just being kind and caring. That's a little different than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this acceptable behavior. Well, you must carry yourself a certain way. And by the way, I saw this a lot growing up in a Southern Baptist church. You guys know I don't practice that. I practice Buddhism, which by the way, is not a religion. It's a way of life. However, growing up in the 70s and early 80s, mostly the 70s, I guess early 80s too, of being there, you were expected, that's right, to dress in your Sunday's best. Don't be disrespectful and roll up in here in jeans. Now that has changed a lot. Right now people are like, well, it doesn't really matter what you're wearing. But there was a sense of this is acceptable behavior. Be seen, not spoken to, acceptable behavior. So you're given this social conditioning of this is how this is what's expected of you. All right. This is how this is your sense of duty. Your duty is to show up kind, show up quiet. I mean, yeah, we all want to be kind. And honestly, this goes a little deeper into like some darker areas. Like, go over there and hug your Uncle John. Meanwhile, you're like, Uncle John is creepy. Like he makes me feel uncomfortable. But back then it'd be like, stop it. Don't be rude. Go over there and hug Uncle John. I don't want to hug Uncle John, but now you feel as though I better go hug Uncle John because this is a sense of duty. This is what I'm supposed to do. And by the way, just a total side note, not just hugging Uncle John, it's dressing your Sunday's best. It's doing and saying certain things. If people are using your actions as a reflection on them, that is always a them issue because you're allowed to live your best life. And I think a lot of people are learning that now as far as like, listen, if somebody's uncomfortable with somebody, do not force that narrative. However, that does still happen. How do I know that? Because there's a lot of clients on the other end of my Zoom or FaceTime that are still dealing with some pretty recent things, even as an older teenager or young adult, where they still feel this sense of obligation to be around people who make them feel uncomfortable. And by the way, you don't have to do that. That was just a side note. You know, I have my ADHD. I'm going to topic hop as something comes up. That's just how I roll. But yes. And so that's the societal conditioning creates a lot of that feeling of obligation, which goes into the very next thing, which is cultural, because it is there, cultural and family obligations. So culturally, and you guys know I have clients in pretty much every continent. So I can see things different with, I have from the country, India, I have Indian clients. And so we've done a lot of deprogramming, right? Because culturally, there's a high level of expectations. You can see that a lot. I have clients in Spain and in Puerto Rico and other, not that I'm classifying all Hispanic families, although there does seem to be a similarity where again, there's certain expectations. Italian families, strict expectations. We get together. We have these Sunday meals. This is what you do. Family is always first. Family is not relatives. Is not. Family are not just family is family. Relatives are relatives. There's this thing going back into societal norms, but also family norms, that blood is thicker than water and you got to do everything because it's family first. No. Family does not have to be relatives. And just because they're related to you does not mean that you have to put up with shit from them. You don't have to put up with the bullshit. Okay, somebody gets upset with you because you're going against the family, then go against the family. Then go hard against the family. Go hard. Because if you feel obligated to, again, this is that family, this is where this obligation comes in, this family and this culture, but again, it's family specific. Well, what do you mean? Of course we do Sunday dinners. And you think, oh my God, I don't want to go to Sunday dinner. my sister's being a total bitch. I'm tired. I don't want to go. And it's like, well, I mean, that's what we do. We're a family. No. You got to be okay. Just side note with this or anything else. If you are not willing to be disliked because you're protecting your peace, you can listen to this podcast, talk to 86 therapists, have 434 sessions with me, and read and watch 10,000 self-help books. If you are not willing to piss somebody off and to be the villain because you are protecting your peace and you are breaking the cycle of obligation, then you are going to stay exactly where you stay. I mean, you are. Just because you have the knowledge, if you're not using it, don't mean shit. Doesn't mean anything. So before you even think about, let me get out of obligations and let me get out of people pleasing. Nope. Before you even start there, say, am I willing to be uncomfortable? Am I willing to maybe, quote unquote, lose people, which they're not keys. You don't lose them. You might lose the idea of how you want it to be. Listen, that family that you speak of may never be the family in which you want. That's a radical acceptance. So again, we're talking about where these origins are, and this is a big one. Societal, yes. Oh my God, the family cultural one is absolutely. Now, part of that also goes, another reason is fear of rejection, which we've talked about conflict. We've talked about fear of rejection, but it's fear of rejection and conflict avoidance. Go back a couple episodes ago on fear of conflict. Again, if you are going to be afraid of rejection, I do this on YouTube too, so I'm over here in quotations. Fear of rejection or afraid to confront someone, then guess what? You're going to always chase the validation. You're going to always chase I don't want them to be mad at me. You're going to always chase, I don't want to deal with it. I'll just put the gray elephant in the corner. The gray elephant's going to live there. And now you're going to have resentment. You're going to feel irritated. You're going to feel all of the above. You're going to feel hurt. You're going to feel disappointed because these expectations of yours isn't being met. First of all, just because somebody says no, and might be a whole different podcast if you want me to do it. Just because somebody says no or they distance from you, you are taking that as rejection. You take no as rejection. No is just no. If you attach rejection to no, you're never going to go for something new. You're not going to get out of a relationship that doesn't serve you. You're not really going to do the help that you need to do for yourself. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. So if you are afraid to hear no, you are always going to run down this, no, meaning rejection. You're going to run down this wall of yourself, of these boundaries. So now you're exhausted because you can't say the word no because you are afraid to have conversation. So then they go, oh, you know what? Okay, fine. If you're not going to do that, then we're just not going to hang out anymore. Why would you take that as rejection? The hell do you want to be around somebody who's going to sit there and have all of these, this and this and this and this? Now that's not to be confused with a boundary. And this might be a good point to put this in. I might have talked about this on the boundaries episode, but a boundary and an ultimatum are two different things. And people said, well, how do I know if I'm setting a boundary or an ultimatum? Okay. An ultimatum is individually specific. So let's say it's your partner. Okay, it's your partner. And you say, well, listen, if you are not going to have good communication with me, then, I need I need you to be a better communicator, or you know what? Then it's done. Then I'm done. That is an ultimatum. A boundary is this. Hey, you know what? Now this is for you. You're telling yourself, I require communication. I require being heard, but I also require myself to hear other people. Now that is not one person specific. So you could relay that and be like, hey, you know what? I really, for myself, I do not allow lack of communication. I don't allow that. So I don't care if John's doing it, your partner. I don't care if your boss is doing it. I don't care if the person at Dunkin' Donuts is doing it. You would say, again, make it your own, but you might say something like, hey, I do not allow myself to remain in any type of a relationship that is not communicative. That's a boundary. That is a boundary. But you're not saying, John, you better get your shit together. No, you're saying this is what it is. Now you're going to have to get on board with understanding John does not have to change. This is going to go into this obligation here in a moment. John does not have to change for you. Does not. Should not, because that's going to be a problem. Now, that being said, you don't have to deal with John. If you're like, these are my non-negotiables, well, then you can let go of John. Your issue is you want to keep John, so you want to put John in a box. That's attachment, that's control, that's manipulation on your part. So that's the big difference between, like if you say, am I setting a boundary? If you're ever setting a boundary out of emotion, that's not a boundary. That's emotional. That is an emotional reaction. A boundary is always based for yourself, and it's blanketed. Not mom, not boyfriend, not girlfriend, not best friend. It's the same across the board. So that's how you can tell the difference. The difference. And that's going to be important here in a second when I start talking to you about, are you projecting it? And so that fear of rejection, like, are you fearing the disapproval? Why? Okay, we know attachment, we know trauma. I'm just saying for the obligation, this is one of the origins for it. This creates obligation. So if you are afraid of rejection and fearing conflict, you are creating a sense of obligation to kind of keep it quiet. Now, my dad was an alcoholic. I came from, you guys know, and believe me, I just did a big chapter on this. Came from a pretty chaotic place. Never really knew what you were going to get day to day, hour to hour, second to second at times. So there was a level of, and we'll talk about this in a minute, there was a level of feeling the need to just kind of keep the peace. Like, oh my God, I just don't. Because living with an alcoholic or anybody who maybe has a mood disorder, BPD, you kind of don't know what you're getting. And there might be a small window, right? So when like my dad was in a buzz, like morning, not really great because he's kind of a little, I don't want to say hungover because I mean, he drank all the time. So it's like, well, let's call it hungover. But then there was that little window. There was a window where he would almost be in a great mood. And you're like, okay, now is the time to ask any favors. Do I need any money? Like, but you have a short window. And it's not like you're like, oh, 12 to 2, we're good. No, sometimes it was longer. Sometimes it was shorter. So now you're dealing with the instability of it. So you're always on guard. So that obligation itself comes into play. All right, because you're trying to avoid the conflict, but you're a big person now. You're a grown up now. So I understand that you're still dealing with this trauma here, but you are an adult now. And until you face that conflict, until you face that rejection, there is no scenario on the planet where you get the confidence and then you do the things. Not happening. Never. It's not going to happen. What you do is you do the things scared, you do them incorrectly, you fail, you come back, you do it scared, you do it with anxiety, you get okay in your feelings because you feel rejected. Then the more you do that, that is where confidence comes. There's no scenario where you get the confidence to do the things. Tell you that because that's where obligation lies. Now, obligation and projection on others. This is where it becomes problematic on your part. You have expectations and assumptions. Now, the assumptions, you probably heard me talk about this. The assumptions are, I would do this, so you have to do this. Like, well, I would do this. Yes, this is exactly what I would do. I don't understand why you're not doing it. Well, guess what? Because people don't have to do the same thing as you. People can vastly, I'm trying to get something off my thing. People can vastly do things differently on the way they want to do them. And then you have to be careful of trying to be the martyr here. Okay. You got to be careful of trying to be the martyr because when you try to be the martyr, now you're like, well, nobody has my heart. Like I love people so much more. Nuh-uh. That's manipulation. Stop doing that. Just because you call and check in on somebody and they don't does not mean that you love them more. It means that you may be utilizing that because you feel like that's what you need. So if you call, you're like, well, I need this, so they need this. That's not always true. It's not always true. So assuming that they should act a certain way because you would do it is going to become problematic. It is going to create animosity on both parts. It is going to create disappointment. But you feel as though they are obligated to do it because that's what you would do. This is where the assumptions come into play too. Well, if I'm always there on the other end of the phone because somebody, if they need me, you just assume that all your friends and family are just going to be there at the drop of a hat. It's not how it's going to work. That's not how life works. All right. I'm not telling you not to have a support system. It's always great. Listen, you're having a bad day. You're in a bad space. Something negative's really happened. It's always great to have a support system. Don't assume that that support system has to drop everything because you're having a bad day. You got to ask someone if they're in a space to hear you, if they have time for you. That's correct. You got to ask them if they have time for you. Now, going to the obligation thing, going backwards, if someone, say your spouse or whatever, friend, sibling, mom, whatever, comes in the house, they've had kind of a day and they just walk in the door dumping things from the get, you have got to stop that. You got to say, hey, you know what? It sounds like you had a rough day. I'd love to hear about it. I'm not in a space to hear about this right now. And then give them, and don't be like, all right, you're never going to talk to you again. Just, hey, you know what? I too had a long day. Give me an hour and I'll be happy to hear it. You got to be willing to say that. When you live with somebody, when you're in a relationship with somebody, that does not give you full access 24/7. Does not. If you feel as though you're obligated to be there at every drop of a hat when you're depleted, you're going to get very resentful. Vice versa. If you expect them to just drop everything, be there right there, that's going to create a problem too. So this is where that sense of obligation is going to come into play and those expectations. And that's why you want to get very, very clear. How else are you projecting your obligations? There's a subtle sense of overt and covert manipulation from you. Yep. You're guilt tripping. Well, okay. I don't understand. I would do that. And I did that last week. That's fine. Remember? I got up at 8:00 in the morning and then I did that even though you don't say it this directly. But okay. I did that. I put my whole day on hold for you. So what? You don't owe them anything. They don't owe you anything. They do not owe you anything. So if you keep going with the guilt trip, you are doing manipulation. If you are a guilt tripper, you are in manipulation. You are manipulating another person because you're giving them this sense of obligation and expectations and assumptions that because you would do this and because you want this, they need to do the same thing. In turn, now we get passive aggressive. Passive aggressiveness and passive aggression is huge manipulation. So now maybe you're not as direct with that guilt tripping. Now it's something like, oh, that's fine. I kind of got a double seater for this event because I thought you were going to come. So, I guess I'll just have to eat the money. The hell is that? First of all, don't assume I'm coming. Ask me before you start buying tickets. Don't assume because I'm your sister, your wife, your girlfriend, your best friend, that I'm just going to be available at the ready. So you have to remember that because this is going to create problems within your marriage, within your friendships, within your work relationships, all relationships, and within your own self. Right? Because you're doing the passive aggression. You're assuming that people just have to be there at the drop of a hat. So this is where that sense of obligation and the people pleasing from what you do always comes with manipulation. People pleasing always, always, always carries a level of manipulation. If I please you, then maybe you'll make me feel loved. If I please you, I'll feel validated. Okay, you're doing it with a manipulative tone, whether you're doing it on purpose or not. So you got to say, am I projecting my sense of obligation because I feel obligated? Now I want them to feel obligated. I'm obligated in your own head. I'm obligated, so I want them to be obligated. And you got to be careful because then you're going to start using, and no, you've been on the other end of this. I think we've all been on the other end of this. If you loved me, you would do blank. Well, I love you. I love you. Clearly, if you loved me, this is exactly what you would do. Yeah. Oh my God, that's emotional manipulation on its highest level. Or the silent treatment. I didn't say gray rocking, silent treatment. Use that as, I have this actually on the worksheet too, is withholding something. I've used this example many, many times. If you're used to, say, pulling my weeds every Saturday, that's what we do. We get together, we have wine, we pull weeds, we talk, it's great. You feel some kind of way because you had some weird expectation and obligation that you thought I should meet and say I don't meet it. And now you're going to be like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to go over there and pull those weeds and have wine. I'm not doing that. So I'm not even going to talk to her about it. No, fuck it. Okay, well, I'll just find somebody else to pull weeds, or I'll sit out there with a bottle of wine and do it myself. I'm not going to kiss your ass because you want me to come after you to feel obligated. So this is where you have to understand confidence is going to come into play on your part. If someone is giving you the silent treatment, again, not gray rock, and go back to that podcast. If someone is giving you the silent treatment or withholding something, people do this with sex, withhold love, withhold attention, withhold it because they're like, oh yeah, you're not doing what I want you to do because I think you should. Why should they? So this is where you have to check yourself while also looking and saying, okay, am I doing this to other people? So the emotional manipulation, think about this. This is where that comes into play. Being praised for helping around the house when you're little and being scolded for not following the rules. What would that look like? Okay, let's think of this in real time. Being praised like, oh my gosh, yes, baby, I am so happy. Wow, you cleaned the house, or, you cooked dinner and you mopped the floor. Wow, I love that. Thank you so, so much. Now, let's say you didn't take out the trash, but you did everything else. Okay? And it was asked, please take out the trash. It's your chore. And the person comes in and you did everything, or maybe you didn't do anything. And now I'm going to make you feel like a piece of shit. Oh my God. I just asked you to take out the fucking trash. Why? Okay. I mean, damn. Okay. Don't ask me for a dime. I'm not giving you money to go to the movies. You're not going to the movies because you didn't do this. That's not the same as creating a consequence. A consequence in boundaries. Okay. So let's say this, a consequence in say chores is you always give the person the option to do it or not with a consequence, not a yelling, not making you feel like shit. So you can say, hey, let me think of this in real time. Hey, you know what? I'm going to be out. I please make sure that the litter is done before I get back because, if the chores aren't done, then you can't have the car. I don't know. I'm not in a negative way, not like, hey, listen, if these things aren't done, then this happens, right? So you're like, hey, you know what? I need the litter and your room cleaned. I know you want to go out tonight for dinner. You're not going to have access to the car. So if these get done, that's fine. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So now you're letting the person know up front, these are the consequences. You're giving them a choice. You're giving them individuality without telling them, you better do this or you're a piece of shit. And when you are told that as a child or growing up or in a family or even from a wife, spouse, anything, this is where that becomes a problem. This is where oh my gosh, I feel this sense of taking care of things because if I do this, I'm told I'm good. If I get an A plus, I'm great. If I get a B plus, you could have done better. There's ways of still creating consequences and putting things into play and creating a level of like, hey, are we going to be equal here, equal-ish? This is how I would like for it to be. And again, going back to the communication, let's communicate about it. But if you were praised for doing something good and then basically chastised and told how wrong you are, or you did 10 good things in your mind and one not so great thing, and that's all that they focus on, well, guess what? You're always going to have a sense of obligation. Okay? If you felt responsible for a parent's feelings, people pleasing, this is going to always make you feel obligated. Oh, but my mom was so sad. And, my dad was an alcoholic. I get it. Mom had anxiety. Dad was an alcoholic. I know she felt very lonely, but then I'm a child, so I don't want to deal with her or him. I don't want to deal with any of it. Right? So there's a level of avoidance, but then you feel obligated. And so now, by the way, you are not responsible for another person's feelings. You don't know this as a child. I understand that, but I'm telling you that comes from there. You are an adult and you are not, capital N-O-T, responsible for somebody else's feelings and vice versa. They are not responsible for yours. If you felt responsible, you will become a people pleaser who feels obligated and then get yourself all up in a tizzy because you're like, well, I'm always there for people, but they're not there for me. Why is that an expectation? That's an expectation. So that obligation, you're projecting that onto other people because you were made to feel obligated and then you adopted that as a people pleasing because that's how you would show love and that's how you would get love because this is what that person did. I think I've used this example before, but my dad was a gambler. He was a drinker, gambler. He got his Social Security check. got it once a month. So if he was gambling or drinking, then he would often run out of money, and then he'd have to borrow money from people, and usually the people at the bar, it's fine. But my sister and I actually laugh about this. And my sister and I aren't uber close, but we will laugh about silly things because we had the same dad. And he would call you, hey babe, how are you doing? Oh my gosh, I was thinking about you. Yeah, I hope you're doing well. I'm like, yeah, Dad, thanks. Oh my God. You're like, wow, great. Dad would be like, hey, I get paid next week. I'm just wondering, do you have like $20 that I could borrow? No, actually, Dad, I don't. You fucking bitch. Oh, that's fine. Look at all the things I've done for you. You're like, whoa, bro, you took that on a dime. So people will often try to manipulate it by giving you just a little breadcrumb, and heaven forbid you say no. So then you fear that aggression. So you're like, fine, I guess I'll give you the $20 because I don't want to hear your mouth. But that's going to happen a lot. It's going to be a sense of obligation, a sense of all of that. Because if you feel responsible for a person's happiness and a person's feelings, then you're always going to remain in that state. And there's going to be a level of manipulation on your part, not necessarily intentional. Okay? The psychological manipulation early in your life, like I was talking about, gaslighting, using love against you, which I said earlier, sex, love, not the same thing at all. Do not ever, side note, sex and love are not the same thing. They do not have to be together, and sex does not equal love, and love does not equal sex. So just total side note on that, because I say that because a lot of my clients will come to me, male and female, by the way, gendered male and female. And, creating a sense of dependency. This is where you see that in narcissism. There's a sense of you need me. You need me. So I'm creating a level of you have to depend on me. So guess what? I have expectations. You better do this. You're going to do that. You're not hanging out with your friends. What the hell is that? Oh, no. I'm the one footing your bill. I'm the only one that's going to put up with your crazy. So, but think as a child, there's a psychological manipulation. You want to be made to feel love and affection. How do you break free of it? Well, we're going to talk about that over on Patreon here in a second. But obviously it's going to be self-confidence, self-awareness, mindful on what the motivations of your actions are, boundaries, creating boundaries for yourself, creating boundaries for other people, facing your fear of rejection, facing your fear of conflict. You cannot get through this unless you're willing to do the work, unless you're willing to be uncomfortable, unless you are really willing to say, oh my God, I have to realize, am I creating this manipulation on other people? Do not judge yourself. Do not be anything other than compassionate with yourself. But you can't heal it unless you understand it and you know it. Okay? You cannot heal it unless you know it and you're willing to work on it and not go into victim mentality. Well, I do this. Yeah, I do this because look at that shitty childhood I have. No. Reason, not an excuse. Reason, not an excuse. So in order to not feel obligated is going to be understanding the origins of it, what it is that you think that you're still trying to accomplish today, why you're holding such validation and care of yourself in somebody else's hands, and how are you doing that as a tool now? Because it isn't everybody else. It is not everybody else. It's also you. It is also you. Don't try to negotiate that in your head. Well, yeah, this is what I expect. This is what I do for them. Skirt, you just did it. Have your boundaries. Have your non-negotiables. Have your boundaries across the board. Not, well, I need this person to change. That's not a boundary. That is an ultimatum. Not the same thing. Ultimatums are always rooted in manipulation. So that's why you feel obligated. That's why you feel disappointed. That's why you feel let down. That's why you feel as though you're never good enough. It's always going to come back to you. It's always going to be about your self-esteem. It's always going to be about your self-confidence. It's always going to be about being willing to accept radically that it is what it is. Your childhood was what it was. Doesn't mean we can't work on it. I do it with my clients all the time. Does not mean that you can't work on it. And again, if that's where you are, you know that you can always get me. The website's always in the description here. But it's so important that you're willing to face yourself, that it's so important that you're willing to accept that this is your responsibility to change these programs. How do you start? Well, I'm going to jump over to Patreon. We're going to talk about the worksheet now. But you're capable of this. You don't have to sit there. The obligations are creating suffering for you, creating them for yourself to do for other people, and also creating them for other people. That's creating your own suffering. You can get out of it. But ask yourself this serious question, seriously. Get ready. Am I willing to be the villain? Am I willing to be uncomfortable? Am I willing to be triggered and work through my triggers? Am I willing to do the hard work? Am I willing to show up for myself on the days I don't feel like it? Am I willing to do that work? If you say yes, then you better be about it. Don't talk about it, be about it. And if you're not ready yet, that's okay. But quite frankly, you're never going to feel ready for it, ever. Again, there's no scenario where you get the confidence and do the things. You're never going to be ready, so you better start today. If you really want to change and reprogram, you got to make the changes. So, with that being said, I'm back from vacation and I'm coming in hot because I'm refreshed and I want you guys to be the best versions of yourselves. I can only give you the information, but if you're not willing to use the tools, again, that's your responsibility. So I'm here. It's time for you to get your shit straight. It's time for you to stand up within yourself, not always defend yourself, but it's time for you to be the best versions of yourself because you deserve it. Okay? So yeah, man, let's go over there and let's talk about how you begin.